So today, it's all about specific detail, you know?
Yeah.
This is number 9 on the competency map of 10. And they're not in any particular order, but I know that when you and I were talking about what order to present them in, it made sense to start with kind of the macro, larger topics first, and then drill down to the things that were important but not essential to a good story. And I mean,
Yeah.
they're all essential. Specific detail is one of those things that, like theme, I know what it is and I know how to do it and I know why I like it. But, gun to my head, I couldn't define it. So I was
Yeah.
looking up different definitions online, really just trying to synthesize what other people are saying. And again, I came across this excellent article by K.M. Weiland. I mean, I can't say enough good things about her. And it got me thinking about things that I wanted to say about specific details. So I sent you some notes. We're going to talk it through, and then hopefully this helps me primarily, and then maybe you, and then maybe anybody else who's listening. So
Yes. We want to be helped. We need to be helped.
for sure.
Guide us hard. Guide us as if we were 13-year-old children trying to learn flag football.
Well, based on their win-loss record, you might not want me to guide you on that. It's been fun. I've enjoyed coaching, but it takes a while to put a team together, just like it takes many drafts to put a story together. You see what he did there? That professional level segue? It's good stuff, man.
Man, oh my gosh.
Ooh.
Are we charging for this? Why are we charging more?
So the funny thing that occurred to me, and I'll just start from the beginning. I love specific detail. It's one of the things that really drew me into fiction as a discipline. And I remember my favorite writer from way back when, Donald Barthelme, does this really well. There are tons of writers who do this really well. And as a reader, you know when it's happening and you know when it's good. But we're going to be talking about it from the writer's standpoint and really how to craft it, how to create it. And again, not speaking from any on high Sermon on the Mount style. We're just talking about like down in the trenches when we're trying to execute this. What is it we're actually trying to do? And maybe through this we can figure out, together how it happens. But the thing I was surprised by is that offering specific detail in fiction is the same as presenting evidence in a legal trial. And what I mean by that is that you're really kind of making the case that what you are pointing the reader to look at closely matters, and matters in a way that it has, deep significance within the story. That's essentially it. All right. Great episode. Take it easy.
Well, it's one of my favorite things too, because when you were telling me that we were doing, that we were going to be looking at specific detail, I just sort of, again, kind of went back to some of the narrative improv training that folks had given me. And the idea that, when you go on stage and you're doing some improv for folks, you have pretty much a blank stage. And, and I know that they're improv groups and they might have like, maybe some backdrops or maybe some set pieces or, the old theater blocks or maybe even some props. But you have to give the audience the detail to show them the world that you're living in, and that's, of course, doing improv, you got to do a lot of miming, and boy, oh boy, if you ain't good at miming, you ain't getting nothing. But it's the detail that really helps to bring a world to life and embellish it. And so it's always nice, Art, when you're talking about a topic and I'm like, well, that reminds me of the old improv days. Let me whittle a piece of wood here while I regale you with the old days.
Yeah.
I recall the suggestion from the audience was a beach ball. Yeah, and I've really, really, really been drilling down into the detail for my novel for this season, where I'm trying to write the noir film, the noir novel. I said film. I know you caught that, but I don't know if you know this, if I ever told you, but when I was a kid, I had to do an oral book report on the bridge over the River Kwai.
No, I didn't know that.
No, I did it. It was in high school. I was supposed to do this oral report on the book. And of course, because I was a knucklehead, I just watched the movie and just crossed my fingers that it lined up with the book. And at the end of my oral report in front of my entire class, I said, and that's how that's how the book ended. My teacher was like, "Oh, did you see the film? It's a lovely adaptation." I was like, "Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. Oh, just to kind of freshen myself up on some details I might have missed. I'm gonna go sit down now. Thank you very much."
That's hilarious. Well,
Yeah.
I have a similar story. When I was in college, when we were in college, Mel Gibson's Hamlet came out on film, if
Ah,
you recall. And
yep.
that was at a time when I was in a Shakespeare class. And so you could tell who only watched the movie because the movie took one liberty that the play did not. When Ophelia has gone mad right before she drowns herself, she gives out flowers and she names them. And in the movie, I think it's Helena Bonham Carter, and she gives out
Yes.
like chicken bones instead of flowers to demonstrate visually that her madness is fully in effect. Well, it was a quiz, and on the quiz, the professor asked, "What did Ophelia hand out?" And like most of the class answered chicken bones. And so you could really tell, where they got their source material.
Finally, one more story then about Hamlet because I was teaching narrative improv at SUNY Brockport in Western New York. And I had a kid who needed extra credit. So I told him, okay, you got to go to Jiva Theater Center in Rochester, New York. You're going to go watch Hamlet. At the time, Jiva Theater Center had Michael J. Fox's sister cast as Hamlet. And I was like, you got to we'd been talking about improv in stage to theater. So he, is going to write a paper on it. And I was like, all right. He hands the paper in. I give him a C+ for the semester, and he contests the grade. And I could go into a whole thing about how late he was all the time and how he was never present. Anyway, he goes, I don't understand how I got a C+. I did the extra credit. I went to go see Hamlet and I wrote the paper. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you about. I just wanted to ask you, did you go see it? He said, I went to go see it. I was like, okay, because I just wondered because you keep on referring to Hamlet's girlfriend, Desdemona. And I was wondering how that came about. And he looked at me for like a full beat and went, well, I didn't know you were going to give me extra credit on the content of the paper. I thought I just had to do it.
Oh God. Okay. Well, he received what he desered.
Yes.
I thought you were going to do a DeLorean joke, like, Doc,
No.
my father was killed by a DeLorean.
You're trying to tell me you built a time machine? No, but this whole thing started. I was talking about the noir book, not movie that I'm writing, and this novel. And I love the fact that with this particular genre, it is so detail heavy because you have to plant the details to bring the light to bring the world, this mall that I have set it in to life, and the very specific details of that mall and of the people who are working in it. But there are also details that you have to fill in so that it makes sense at the end when you pull the string and say, this is how the crime that I've written about is committed. And I also love the fact that I'm planting a lot of red herring details. Oh,
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
So, yeah.
You can't overshare there because we don't want to blow it. But yeah, I'm
Right.
looking forward to having that conversation with you another time. Well, let's
Yes.
do some of the kind of L&D stuff first. Let's just talk about how to execute specific
Okay.
detail, why you would want to do this in the first place, and then also what are some of the risks that you need to be aware of. So let's cover that first, and then we'll get to the good stuff, which is diving into your specific detail in your novel, and maybe a little bit of mine. But I really like talking to you about yours. So basically, in order to execute specific detail, there's two things you've got to do. The first is focus or linger on something critical, important, or necessary, and it really is to kind of zap the reader into paying close attention to the thing that you are looking at. So like an example might be, a bad example would be his teeth were yellow, right? Instead, a better example would be something that lingers on perhaps the yellowness of his teeth, if that is something that's important. So if you've got a character who you're trying to paint as, let's say you have a character you're trying to demonstrate as destitute. Well, what are some of the things that an observer, an astute observer, would notice about a person that would allow them to arrive at that judgment? And that's the second thing, is offering a value judgment. So really what you're doing is you're lingering on a detail, spending more time on that aspect of the character, that piece of the plot, whatever. you're focusing on that for a longer than usual time so that you can describe it well. And then you are providing a value judgment on that so the reader knows how to interpret it. So like in the example of his teeth were yellow, it could be more like his teeth were caked with plaque, and there was like a dingy film filling in the gaps between his teeth and like all this other stuff. Again, there would need to be a reason for you to linger on that, but that would be a perfectly good way to do it. So like all of your other descriptions in that particular paragraph might be very surface, but this one thing that you've decided to linger on, that specific detail, is something that makes us perk up as a reader and go, oh, this must be important. They're spending a lot of time on this.
And the thing I love about detail also kind of puts me in, because I tend to focus on all the things at once, and that's what I'm hoping to write into as I work through the drafts, is which of these details is important, which of them are legitimate, sort of red herrings for this crime novel, and which of them I don't need, and I hope that I need them all, because I don't want to start cutting words out, because I'm just barely going to hit that 50,000 word mark.
Yeah, no. Don't worry about the word count. It'll take care of itself. Well, the red herrings are important because of the genre that you've chosen. You need to misdirect the reader a little bit. When we get to the risks, we'll talk a little bit about the dangers of misdirecting the reader too much. But I think your genre requires you to do a little bit of that, kind of matador and bullfighting aspect, where the reader's like, I see where this is going, and you're like, ole, and you pull the cape up, and
we'll have to see if it
exactly
works. The bull might run me over.
So the execution is those two things: focusing or lingering on something that requires more explanation, more nuance, more viewing, and then offering that value judgment on that detail. So if I want someone to think of this character favorably, then maybe the details I'm going to pick out are, like let's say it's a young girl that a protagonist is enamored with. Well, he might describe the way that the sun sort of plays in her hair, the type of clothing that she's wearing. He might linger on like a yellow sundress or whatever. And it's interesting because in that first draft, really let your mind wander and go free. You will be amazed at what details sort of pop up seemingly out of nowhere. A lot of this is going to be coming from your subconscious, things that you've probably experienced or seen, or experienced. And it'll just naturally sort of place itself there. Now, it may not stick. It may not be what you ultimately keep. Because remember, in those second, third, fourth, fifth drafts that you come back through, you're going to be looking at it with a more critical eye as far as, hey, does this specific detail actually support my theme, my characterization, etc.? And it might be cool, but it doesn't fit. And so you have to have the courage at that point to say, well, I'm going to snip this out and put it in a different document. Maybe I can use it in a different story, but it doesn't really fit here. So specific detail is one of those things. Really let yourself go nuts in that first draft. Just do everything that you want to do. And when you come back through, that's when you can be a little more critical in your review.
One of the things that's happened as I've just hit the 40,000 word mark, gearing towards that 50,000. One of the things that's sort of happened is that I've started to, through writing that first big fat chunk of the book, I've started to understand what details I want. At the beginning, I was doing that. I had details. I got details upon details. But then as I started to sort of think, I think this is the direction that this is going in, and I think this is the direction I want it to go in. The details sort of, I started to subconsciously, I think, eliminate the stuff that I know that I might use. So I need to remember that. I don't want to start being a little bit too stringent, might be the word. I still want to have that fun of writing a lot of detail so that I can cut out what I don't need later. But it sort of started to kind of edit itself in a way towards the end here.
That's great. I mean, you're really good at that by sort of adding more and being able to cut back. It's easier to cut than it is to add, and you live that. So that's really cool. Let's talk about why you would do this. So we know when specific detail occurs, probably in our favorite books, it's some of the most elegant passages, the quotable lines, the things that we really like about literature. But why do it in the first place? So there's three main reasons to do it. And of course, you know me, I'm going to give you steps on how to execute it. There's a 2-step to execute, and there's a 3-step on why. So there you go. There's the 5. Art hit his quota of 5 today. So
I'm in it.
so the why you want to execute this first is to promote the detail's relative importance for the reader. What I mean by that is you are lingering on this thing that's important, and the lingering makes it more important relative to everything that's around it. Oh, the sea was black, the chair was uncomfortable, but the sun was, blazing hot and glaring, and he had to squint, so much to keep the sun out of his eyes. Even when he closed his eyes, he could still see the red glow of the sun on his eyelids and all this other stuff. Oh, okay. I get it. So like the sunlight is very important in this particular moment in the story.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. I get it. Or you could go a different way, which is, the sun was blazing hot. He was very uncomfortable, but my God, the chair he was sitting in, it was so stiff. There was no support. He couldn't find a way to get comfortable. He squirmed and couldn't, and so you kind of linger on the chair. Whatever you want to linger on is fine. It's your story. Linger wherever you want. But the thing that you're lingering on is telling the reader, hey, this is important. And so that leads me to the second thing. It really helps to immerse the reader in your setting, your conflict, or your action. So if I have ever sat in an uncomfortable chair, which I think many of us, if not all of us, have, then I can identify with that character. I can imagine and probably even feel the sensation of sitting in an uncomfortable chair, and I'm there. And so that's the other power that the specific detail has. It's helping to promote that detail as super important, and it's helping to immerse me in the narrative. The last thing is that it proves your case to the reader specifically about why your world is the way you say it is. So it's really about, hey, this thing is important because. So those are the reasons you kind of do specific detail.
It's been nice to have you as a cheerleader over the years, Art, because you've always been like, you've got a good voice. This is your voice. You'll find that voice, just kind of honing that skill. And I think that the stuff that you out there as the individual writer are focusing on, since that's important to you, you're going to be able to give it that flavor that really makes it pop. And I think that that's really, really important to try and latch onto. Sometimes when I see social media and I see somebody that thinks the same thing that I do, I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only person that liked to wake up at 5 a.m., sit in the darkness, drink a cup of coffee, and then think about nothing until my dog comes out and needs a walk.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a very basic thing, but there are other people that enjoy that. And so the specific things that you are pointing out with that detail, man, get it. To really laser focus what you are, what you're saying, what that voice is through detail.
Yeah, because very often, many of the plots are somewhat recycled. You can look at, I love looking at Harry Potter and Star Wars Episode 4, and you see this tremendous parallel. That doesn't invalidate either of those works. They're both delightful stories, but they do follow a similar trajectory. So what makes it different enough to be its own story? It's all the specific detail. The characters are completely different. The world building is different, but the plot is very similar. What trials and tribulations, what type of protagonist there is, there's a lot of similarity there. So it's all in the details, right? They used to say the devil's in the details. It's all in the details. So I'm really excited to get into it because the detail is one of the things that I want to create more than the plot, more than the character. That was what really got me into this to begin with. Let's talk about some of the risks. So the first thing I want to mention is if everything in your narrative is special, then nothing is special. What I mean by that is if you take this lingering, long, detailed approach to every single thing that's mentioned in your story, then the reader is left not knowing what's more important and what's less important. Everything is of equal importance. And, from a learning standpoint, in my day job, I'm a learning and development professional. And it is really important to be able to have learners identify what's critical, what's nice to know. And so in your narrative, there's plenty of moving pieces on the chessboard, people going to different locations, ordering a soda, whatever. There's lots of stuff that's going to happen that you don't need to necessarily linger on. And so balancing the amount of things that you really drill down and linger on with specific detail versus things that you just sort of have happen is important. I would recommend don't linger on everything, essentially.
Or else you get that whale chapter from Moby Dick. We've talked about that before.
Right.
It's just too much. It's
Right.
just too much.
So the other thing is, if you linger too long or too hard, it might actually give away twists in your story. And you may have experienced this in stories that are a little more ham-handed or on the nose or easy to predict. So if you've ever experienced a story like a Hallmark movie, right, that's super easy to predict, or a murder mystery where they kind of tip their hand a little too much, and you know who the villain is, early on. It might be because your specific detail was punching up things that are going to be important later. And I, as a thinking, feeling human being, am trying to complete that pattern. Readers are trying to recognize patterns. And so if we follow a plot template too closely and we aren't original or inventive or subversive, we're just kind of following stories that we've been familiar with from the past. And we're like, oh, well, that story did A, B, and C, so I'm going to do A, B, and C and make sure that my story, quote unquote, works. Well, it might work too well, and people can sort of anticipate what's coming, jump to the end. And ultimately, readers are disappointed when they can predict what's going to happen. So lingering too long or too hard on specific details like, see, the manhole cover. Oh, what is it about the manhole cover? Right. And then eventually, that's the key to the mystery is the manhole cover. And you're like, well, I saw that back in Act 1. Like, all right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's another consideration.
I've got a really difficult task as well with writing a mystery kind of novel because my partner's one of those people that watches the movie with me, and in 5 minutes in, she's like, oh yeah, he's gonna, she just knows the ending before. And I'm sitting there like, how did you know that? So I've got to be careful. That tip in the hand is a difficult one.
I can do that as well. My daughter is really good at that. But again, it's because you become familiar with tropes. And, with so much content out there, there's a lot of copycatting in the less than stellar stuff that's created. And so it's very easy to spot, oh, this is probably what they're doing. And you're right, like 2/3 of the time. So if you're really looking to create literature and trying to create something unique, special, important, be comfortable in that first draft doing whatever the heck you want, all of it. And then when you come back, especially if you have a little bit of time off, those things will kind of leap out at you. And if beta readers that you get involved, because you do need to have other people read your work before you try to submit it for publication, if they, I actually use questionnaires, very small, like 5 questions, but I typically do ask, hey, can you tell me if you could predict the end of the story? Like, when did you think you knew what was going to happen? What page? And then when did it lock in that you knew it was going to happen? And ideally, that would be when it happens. I didn't know it was going to happen until it actually occurred. So that's worthwhile.
Boy, I'm nervous about that because, of course, being involved in it and writing it from page to page, I'm like, oh, I think I've done good. I think I've sort of like, I got my throwaway details. I've got the details that are serious. Here's this thing that I've been doing over again that I, this one detail that I keep saying over and over again. And, it's going to be funny. It's going to be fun to find those first readers and be like, so first off, does it make sense? I think my questionnaire would be just like, does it make sense? You know what I mean? And then, of course, then it gets a little bit more nitty gritty. Like, could you predict it? Please say no.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's actually something we should do a separate episode on. Season 3 might be shaping up to be what's all the stuff you have to do to be a writer that has nothing to do with writing.
Yeah.
And we'll see how many subject matter experts we can pull in. I'd like to have that be the theme of season 3. But one of those is, providing feedback and also receiving feedback. And what do you do with that? How do you process it and do something purposeful with it? But again, as a learning and development professional, one of the things that we are drilled on early on in our careers is if you have a survey, make it short. Because people don't want to sit there and fill out a long survey, and they're happy to share their opinion, but if it takes more than 4 minutes, it's a problem. So like, that's one of the things I try to do. Is why I keep it to 5 questions. For the most part, it's either short answer or it's a scale, a Likert scale from 1 to 5. And that can be really helpful. So we'll talk about that in a different episode. But it's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's the last risk that we've got to look at, which is if you linger on irrelevant things to misdirect the reader might resent you for it. And in your case, Tim, I think that's less of a risk, because there's an expectation that you'll be rope-a-doped, or however you want to refer to it, misdirected. That's kind of the point of that genre. But if I'm writing straight literature, or if I'm writing a sci-fi book and I'm purposely misdirecting you onto things that don't matter, just so that I can go, haha, it's this. You're like, well, you didn't tell me any of that. Like, where the hell did that come from? So you got to be really careful about that as well. So I think, if we linger on things that are interesting or relevant to us as writers, and we just focus on the things that are cool, it should kind of take care of itself, especially if you go back through a few times and do some healthy edits.
Yeah. And that's the thing as well is, there's sort of like a big reveal towards the end, or there's a detail that happens, or something that I come across. I am making a list of details that I need to have way back at the beginning of the story to lay that groundwork. I need to have that payoff, and I can't have it like that if I feel, if I've given the reader, like I've led them along this path, and then it's like, oh, surprise, this person was, this person worked as an EMT, and suddenly they know how to, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I think in your case, just kind of thinking off the cuff, it seems like anything that you put forward as a possible suspect needs to have a rational answer as to why it didn't work out. So for example, oh, you were behind the shed at 5:15, with an axe. What were you doing back there, right? There needs to be an actual reason for that person to be back there. And as long as you have that, then you're good. It's just like, well, I don't know. And then it disappears from the narrative, and you're like, well, wait a minute, what about the guy with the axe?
Yeah. And that's fine if your name is David Lynch. You can do that all day long if you want. And one of the things that I've been kind of like back and forth on is, one, I need to have the crime and where everybody was, and yes, exactly what you're saying. Why were you behind the shed with the axe at this time? I need to have that solid. I'm more interested, I think, in the main character and the other characters around her, in how they are trying to solve this crime and why they want to do it. And that touches upon theme, which is what we talked about a couple episodes ago. So the problem is, I'm sort of like, don't do that thing that you've done in the past. I've always used to be like the whole like, oh, you know what? I don't think the details really matter much, because, dude, it's more about the theme and what's going on with the main character. You know what I mean? And that's called laziness. That's called just trying to make it so you don't have to do the work to do that. So really shoring up the details and the world that's going on there, and all of the things and where people are positioned, and the sort of theme and the emotional states of the people that are involved in it. Those things, balancing those two, man, I'm really hoping that, maybe this time next year, I'm able to say, okay, cool. I think I've got something that's pretty solid and addresses both of those things. It's entertaining, but it has a heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell the gang, what's your word count right now?
I am at 40,000 words. I just hit that today because I was at work and I just snuck off to the coffee shop around the corner, because I just had a couple of, I think I mentioned this to you in a phone call that we had the other day, Art, but I don't think I mentioned it here. I'm starting to write a little bit faster now that the ideas are coming. And when I give a detail that I want to have as part of the final draft, but I haven't foreshadowed that detail, I've started to write in all caps. Fix this earlier. This person needs to be at this spot at 5 p.m., for example. And so sometimes what I've been doing is, instead of sitting down and trying to hit 1,000 words in 45 minutes, which has been what I've been doing throughout this writing process, now I'm having sessions where I just try to go back and just have something in place, fix those all caps notes, So, yeah, I'm at 40,000 words, and I'm going to try and, I think what are we going to try and record 2 more episodes?
Yeah, we've got two before the end of the season, and well, two
Ooh.
two full length, and we've got 2 refills to go with it.
Well, I think I could try and, I don't know, the dash towards the last 10,000 words. I know how I want it to end. I know the I was going to say gimmick, but I don't want to, whatever. I know the placement that I want to have to sort of reveal the plot and catch the bad guy. And I know that. So I'm hoping that that would take maybe 3,000 words. Got to have an epilogue in there. So I'm excited. I'm excited.
So, are
But
you writing in sequence?
I am writing in sequence.
Oh, that's
Yes.
cool. That's cool.
It's just kind of speeding along. And it's really weird because I mean, yeah, this past week, I had about 4 days. I was visiting my partner out in Detroit. She was in a show. And so we were staying at her guest artist housing, and the bed there at this hotel was physically assaulting me at night. Like, it was the worst sleep I've had in eons. And so I was getting very, very tired. I didn't get really full night's sleep. Of course, she's on a show schedule, which means she gets home at like 10 or 11. And I'm like, it's 9 p.m. It's time for me to go to bed. So I was very tired. And that's when the depression starts kicking in, so that I was getting to a point where I was like, I'm leaving so many details. There's so many open threads. I'm never going to be able to tie them all. And I think I actually even spoke to you about it a little bit, and you were like, just keep going. And that was really helpful. So the self-doubt is definitely there, but if you're out there, man, and you're just trying to like plug through, keep plugging. The only way out is through. So keep doing it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, you've got me sitting here going, "Wow, I can't wait to read this," and so you can't let me down. So there you go. There's your reason.
And also because the writing leads you to solutions. That's been happening a lot for me, and I'm so excited. I get a little bit reticent about, the characters making their own choices. Sometimes I feel a little bit weird about saying that because I'm the one writing it, But I really do feel like with some of the quandaries and some of the corners I've painted myself into, I've just tried to pay attention to what I want, who that character is to me, and and kind of figuring out how they would react in this situation. And that's been very helpful. So
Yeah, they're
yeah,
all they're all
yeah,
aspects of us. I mean, that's how I
yeah.
feel. Yeah, I might have a jackass character, and that well is deep, my friend. I have plenty of jackass to draw on, so I can write that with aplomb.
Yeah. I'd
um,
be happy to share with you some of my
right.
jackassery
No,
too.
I'm sure we have many object lessons we could draw from.
Yes.
Also, social awkwardness. I could write that really well. Overconfidence, overweening pride. I can write all of that perfectly. Putting your foot in your
Yes.
mouth. I've done that. Like, yeah, I mean, there's just so much to draw on. It's funny though. I've been selecting characters in my book that are really just not caricatures, but they punch up one idea, and I try to round them out a little bit because I don't want them to be caricatures, but I want them to be interesting people who function in a particular way in the narrative, and I see that as a form of specific detail.
Yeah.
Because if every character were complex and rounded, but they were only in the narrative for a small amount of time, that might be the reader getting frustrated. Like, why did we spend all this time developing this minor character who basically just drives you from A to B and then drops out of the narrative? Like, what are we doing here? And
Right.
that's one of those things that I want to be very mindful of. Like, there's a guy who drives in my novel, and it's a really weird scene. The guy is gruff and unapproachable. He's one of these laborers who the main character gets sort of in trouble with his boss and has to go out into a storm to accomplish a goal or a task that could very easily be done the next day. It's clearly a punishment. And so
Mhm.
this guy is, being punished alongside, even though he didn't do anything wrong. So he's very annoyed, and his whole demeanor is just, "Rrr." Like, that's all he gives. So I'm like, all right, well, I got to make a scene out of this. And so the main character is trying to strike up small talk, even though he doesn't want to. He feels awkward, like he has to. And his dog is with him as well. So it doesn't go very well. And they get into this rainstorm. And the guy's coping mechanism to deal with the rainstorm is to turn the music up really loud, like
Oh,
uncomfortably loud. And that's
yeah,
how he achieves focus to get through this storm, which is a pretty intense storm.
yeah,
And so the whole thing is riddled with the main character really just being uncomfortable in this awkward situation. And then
yeah,
he arrives at the location and his dog goes racing off and he's got to go, figure out what the hell's going on. Plus he has to accomplish the BS task that they've assigned him. And it goes from there. So like that's how I've been trying to use characterization and specific detail. That guy's whole essence is I'm pissed off that I have to be here because of you.
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
all the details I've chosen and will choose in my rewrites are going to punch up that one aspect of really that's a conflict in the scene. And that guy probably won't be around for the rest of the narrative. I think this is the only service he provides is taking the main character from A to B. And I think it cuts away. I don't even take him from B back to A. Like there's no need. We kind of just cut to where he's already back and the story
yeah,
progresses. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and that's it. The other thing that I love sometimes is when you have a secondary character, but the game for me, the word game, is trying to find a very specific detail that gives you their entire character. So the fact that you've come up with somebody whose reaction to the rainstorm is just to turn the music up, it's like that's fantastic. Like you almost don't need anything else than that. That's amazing.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to show you what I've done so far. It has to hang together first. It really feels more like a series of exquisitely detailed notes, and I'm
Uh,
I'm very sheepish about that, but it's further than I've gotten before, so I'm hopeful.
and what is may I ask what your word count is at present?
Oh, I'm still around, I think
Oh,
7,500, eight
okay.
thousand, somewhere up in there. I'd have to check. But yeah, I'm in the distant rearview mirror when we talk about, Tim's movement. We were talking about it though. I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for one thing. All the refills end up being about 1,000 words a piece because they're
Yeah,
about 6 minutes
yeah,
long. So like, okay, I've done a bunch of refills. It's not that I'm not writing and I have nonfiction that's been published. So I am writing. It's just that you are laser focused on the novel, which is so impressive. And I'm trying to get to that point.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It helps when I am severely depressed about my job. It just helps me get my mind out of it.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so I don't want to make that anybody's prescription. Well, I just got to go find a job that I hate and hate everything about my life so I can go ahead and
Right.
focus on. But I'm trying to turn that energy into something positive, and so yeah, it's been very helpful. Yeah, it's been fun, but yeah, detail. I love detail, and especially with science fiction, detail is so much fun for me to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause it's
So
about that world building that we were talking about in the setting
yep.
episode. That is the primary way that you build that. Like the ring wing airplane that I was showing you or
Oh
telling you
yeah.
about, that
Yep.
that roots that world in a different reality that is sort of similar to, but distinctly different from what we live with. And it
Right.
just helps to kind of paint that otherness of the setting and allow you to transport into this new area. There's a bunch of science fiction books. And I've really not been a big sci-fi reader. I consume a lot of movie and TV sci-fi, but I'm remiss. I haven't really read very much. And I'm worried. Let me just ask you this before we wrap up today. I'm worried that if I start reading a bunch of really good sci-fi, that I'll start ripping it off. What do you think about that? Because I'm interested in how really strong authors, Hugo and Nebula award-winning authors, are crafting their stories. But I don't want to be influenced by it at the time that I'm writing one, because I'm deathly afraid that I'll rip them off. So what do you think?
Well, I just shifted my seat because I love talking about this. And I'm so glad that you decided to ask a Hugo award winning author like myself. Now, if I should opine, no. Look, I have said probably ad nauseum to you and to this podcast and to the lovely people who have decided to download this. I'm looking at it right now. I'm looking at Beastie Boys book. I have my Beastie Boys action figures on my shelf in the other room. I love the fact that Beastie Boys took everything that they loved that came before them. They put it in a pot, stirred it up, and and presented it to you as something new. and they don't shy away from that. So I'm always of the mindset of to read more, read more, read more. This noir thing that I'm doing, we talked a little bit earlier. You were talking about how Star Wars and the kid, the Harry
Harry
Potter,
Potter, yeah.
but those two stories are, you can draw a lot of the same out of that. They're both essentially kind of the same story, but the perspectives from the two different authors make them very, very different. One, of course, being a jerk who doesn't believe that people should be who they want to be. Anyway, the other thing that I'm trying to say is there's nothing new under the sun. It's all about your perspective. So with this noir novel that I'm trying to write, I have been watching all of the noir films I can get my hands on. And I know that I've listed a bunch of them here before, so I won't do that again. At least I think I do. I can't remember last week, much less 4 episodes ago. So I'm always of the mindset that yes, read more, read more, read more, read more, because I love putting in little my little homage to the things that I love. Obviously I don't want to steal directly. I am going to borrow heavily from The Thin Man in some aspects, because that to me is my absolute favorite noir film.
Nice.
But it's because of my perspective and that I want to make it the book that I want it to be. Why not take a couple things from some of the things that you really, really like, because that's what brought you to the place where you wanted to write it in the first place. So I'm always for reading more of the stuff that you're doing.
Yeah.
But conversely, a long time ago, I'll make this very quick. A long time ago, I managed to finagle my being a reporter at a newspaper in Rochester, New York, and I managed to interview Paul Barker, who was the bass player for Ministry for a while. Ministry being one of my favorite industrial metal bands of the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, early zeros, up to now. Anyway, when I asked him, what is your favorite industrial music that you're listening to right now? At the time that I interviewed him, and this was about 20 years ago, he was like, I don't really listen to industrial because I don't want to get bogged down in that. So the other perspective is just as valid. You don't want to get bogged down in seeing what everyone else is doing, because you want to try and whatever, for example, the science fiction that you're writing means to you is how you present it. So
yeah. What gets me is I might originate something whole cloth that I think is really compelling and, quote unquote new. And then I'm concerned that I'll then show that to people and go, isn't this amazing what I came up with? And they're like, oh yeah, that's just this book or this other book,
Yeah.
And I'm like, but
Yeah.
I haven't read, I don't even know about those books. And they're like, yeah, well, tough. It's there. So, that's just, I don't know. That's the self-doubt that you were talking about. That's my manifestation of self-doubt. Like, well, what's the point? It's all been done anyway. So,
but your perspective, but art's perspective is what I want to read.
Right.
Right. That's what's important. And Joe Schmo out there, that's your perspective, and that's what people want to read. I mean, is The Martian and Robinson Crusoe kind of the same thing? Castaway, isn't Castaway and The Martian kind of the same thing?
Yeah, I guess so.
But we love The Martian, and I love Castaway, and so it's your perspective that makes it genius. It's the details you want, that you're focusing on, that are going to make it rise above the other stuff that you love.